Oh, I cannot tell you how hard it was to get ready for this video because last year when I did top 10 comics of 2023, I had only been doing this channel for a few months, so there weren't that many comics to choose from. This year, I have had so many great series that I have to deal with choosing between. I'm serious, I labeled over this for days. I spent literal days just reading comics so I could refamiliarize myself with all these series that I've been thinking about and talking about for the past year. But I have finally done it. I have finally made a top 10 comics of 2024 list that I am proud of. And Ultimate Spider-Man is not on that list. Cry me a river. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and these are my top 10 comics of 2024. But before we get into those, you know that we have to do a few runner-ups. This one was a runner-up last year too. It's Saga. It is still coming out. It's gonna keep coming out until the day we die, if not later than that, because this series just goes and goes and goes and goes forever and ever. It's still really good, and the art by Fiona Staples is amazing, but I don't feel like there's enough of a strong direction in there. There's barely any emotional payoff in each individual issue, at least. If you look at every 6-issue clump, then there might be a little bit of emotional payoff, but not that much. So it's great, it's still there, but it's not as satisfying as the other stuff. I'm not a big fan of DC, but the Boy Wonder miniseries by Juni Ba was amazing. Really great art, really smooth, seamless storytelling. It made these, 60, 70 years of Robins all coalesce into one very easy to digest story. It's got heart, it's got humor, it's got its very own specific flavor to it. It is really a piece of art. And I wanted to put it on my top 10 list, but it got shoved off by other stuff. So it's not that it wasn't good enough for the top 10 list, it's that there were so many great comics that were even better than this. This next runner-up is fairly recent. I've been really enjoying it. It has a great writer and great artist, and I love every issue, and I'm definitely going to keep collecting it. But the fact of the matter is, Hyde Street is kind of just running on gimmick power at this point. It's not a total ripoff, but it is very similar to the Twilight Zone. And it's got its own continuity, it's got its own universe, it's got its own recurring characters, so it's not just one-off episodes every issue. It has an overall plot, but it has yet to grab me by the heartstrings. Right now, it is just really cool. And it certainly is really cool. It has a ton of references that I love, it has a ton of character development that I love. The art by Ivan Reis is amazing, but like I said, it's just really cool, and that's not enough to get it onto the top 10 list this year. This next one I really struggled with. It's another Ghost Machine title, and I think it's even better than Hyde Street, but still just barely doesn't make the cut for top 10. It's Geiger by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. One of my favorite titles that I'm collecting. I love Gary Frank's work. It's so clean. It's got that classic detailed comic look that I love. And the last few issues, we've been really focusing on the animals in this desolate wasteland, and I really like that. The only reason that it's a runner-up instead of being on the top 10 list is because I'm just not that invested in the overall plotline of this series. This dude Tariq is on a mission to get rid of his powers that make him into the glowing man, and I just kind of don't care whether he gets there or not. It's a great series with really solid world building, really solid character development, really solid relationships and dialogue and art, but in the long run, I'm not that invested in the narrative, at least not enough to put it on the top 10 list. And the last series on my runner-up list is another one that I've really labored over because I love the series. I love reading every new issue. It's so fresh and exciting and fun and different, and I really feel like I am seen as a fan of all things comic and cartoon related. It's Uncanny Valley by Tony Fleece and Dave Wachter, which is one of my favorite series coming out right now. But the reason it is on the runner-up list instead of the top 10 list is because this series is also kind of running on gimmick power. Having the Roger Rabbit / Space Jam cartoons juxtaposed with real-life stuff dynamic is really fun and really fresh, and I especially love the cartoon history that's involved in here, like Gertie the Dinosaur in the most recent issue. But when it comes to the actual plot, the overall narrative, and the overall lesson of the story, it's a little bit corny, it's a little bit thin, it's impactful, but it's not really that fresh. But like I said, I love this series. I had to really labor over my decision to not put it on the top 10 list. It was that close. And much as I love every single one of those series, the top 10 books themselves are even better. So coming in at number 10, we have the only DC title featuring regular DC characters. It's Absolute Batman by Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta. Everybody loves this book. It's the best Batman book since New 52, which makes sense because Scott Snyder is the best Batman writer since, I don't know, would you say Frank Miller, I guess? This new alternate universe Batman is nuts. He's huge, he's incredibly smart, he's all over the city, he has no money, which is a really refreshing change of pace. He's funny in the way that only Batman can be funny, but he's also really intense and scary scary when he has to be. And if I was to make suggestions for the next artist to work on a big Batman book, it probably wouldn't have been Nick Dragotta, but his style is really popping here. He can do so much with a panel in terms of establishing setting and atmosphere and tone, and he's also really good at economy of space, because on this page he has 18 panels, but it's very clear what's happening in all of them. You get a sense of emotion from all of them. It's really solid cartooning. This is the first time I've been excited about a new Batman series that I get to collect while it's coming out, because I didn't get to collect New 52 when it was coming out because I was in, 8th grade? So I am stoked that I get to finally be excited about a brand new Batman title, and I get to collect it as it's coming out. But I know there's a million videos you can watch about that series, so moving on to number 9 of the top 10 comics of 2024, it's the only Marvel series that's on this list. I made a video about it way back when it came out, but that was a while ago. It's Avengers Twilight by Chip Zdarsky and Daniel Acuna. Wow, I cannot believe how much Acuna has made me love his art. I used to think it was so boring and abstract and impossible to tell what was going on, but in these 6 issues he has packed so much emotion and world building and detail into such a small amount of space. It is really, really impressive. I compared this before to The Dark Knight Returns, which it is pretty similar to. The theme is that these heroes are coming out of hiding after being away, and the world has kind of spiraled downwards since they've been gone. But it's not just a derivative Marvel version of The Dark Knight Returns. It's also a very good broad look at the Marvel universe as a whole, very similar to Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross, which encompass the entire Marvel universe. This is some of the freshest superhero comic art I saw all year long. Every single page has something else that makes me go, wow. I love the super detailed world building. I love the way that these characters have aged over the years. I love the scope of the story and the revelations that are made about the Marvel Universe, and I love that it was tied up into a neat little package after just 6 issues, so it's something you can enjoy from beginning to middle to end, and it's not just an ongoing series that lasts for like 30 to 50 issues and you feel is just never gonna reach a stopping point. That being said, I do think it was a bit too tidy of a bow at the end. I feel like everything ended and everybody was happy, which just isn't that realistic, and I'm a little bit tired of seeing the Red Skull pop up as the big bad villain, because honestly, I'm kind of tired of the guy, and I feel like there is a way to make Nazism appropriate to this day and age in the comics, but we just haven't had it yet. But overall, Avengers Twilight is nothing but breathtaking art, some of the best scripting I've seen from Chip Zdarsky, and it really treats my favorite characters well. What can I say? So that's number 9, Avengers Twilight. Coming in at number 8 is a Ghost Machine title that I think will probably surprise a lot of you, because I don't think it's the most highly regarded of the Ghost Machine titles, but it's the one that has connected with me the most, it has engaged me the most, it's kept me the most interested this whole time, and the latest issue in particular really got to me on a deeper level than any of the other Ghost Machine titles. It's Red Coat by Jeff Johns and Brian Hitch, 2 of the greatest comic creators out there. The premise is goofy. It's some dumb British soldier who accidentally became immortal, and now he has to live forever and deal with being an irresponsible schmuck forever. But listen, I love Forrest Gump and American history. I love that he spent the first 6 issues hanging out with a young Albert Einstein. I love that George Washington is the ultimate bad guy in this series. And I especially love issue 7, where we finally get to see Redcoat showing some significant heart, showing him really caring about people in a way that he's tried to convince us for 6 issues before this he's just incapable of. But I think that pacing is what really ended up convincing me that this is a good character. Whereas in series like Rook Exodus, I feel like the pacing is too fast for me to actually be convinced about somebody's character. It just feels kind of like plot, 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 plot. Redcoat gives itself space to breathe so you can believe in the character development, and it also gives Brian Hitch a lot of time to show that he is one of the greatest comic artists of all time. One big complaint that I've had about Brian Hitch's art is that when he draws arms, it looks like they're just about to fall off of somebody's torso, and their torso is just a bit too long, so everybody kind of looks like a big old gangly monkey. But when all your characters are wearing colonial outfits, there's no spandex to see the weird hinges on people's arms. So it's really playing to his strengths, is what I'm saying. So that's number 8, Red Coat. Number 7 is a little bit different. It's a series that I still haven't fully wrapped my head around, but it's partly because it's so dense and there's so much to think about and process that it really impresses me. It's the 3-issue series Bear Pirate Viking Queen by Sean Lewis and Jonathan Marks Baravecchia. This story about freedom and conquest and possession is so beautifully illustrated. Every single page is just another piece of frame-worthy art that you could put on your wall. It's not what I would call clean, it's not orderly, it's not conventional, it's not what most people think of when they think of a comic book, but the emotion, the atmosphere that's conveyed in these pages is so tangible. You really feel like you are sucked into a world that exists within these pages. The dialogue is unique, the lettering is unique, the art style is unique, the pacing is unique, the panel choices is unique. This series is locked into its own vision. It's not trying to be anything else, it's just being the best there is at what it does. So if you're willing to do the work of reading a very dense, somewhat abstract comic, it's absolutely worth it for the emotional roller coaster that it takes you on. So that's number 7, Bear Pirate Viking Queen. Number 6 is a series that I started talking about way back when it first started coming out, and I'll admit that I wasn't that impressed with it at the time, but only the first couple issues came out when I made those videos. And after all 5 issues came out and I went back and reread the whole thing, I was blown away. This series made me think more than any other series on my list. It's Animal Pound by Tom King and Peter Gross. It started as a kind of modern retelling of Animal Farm, which I read the first few chapters of to kind of see the parallels between the two stories, but then it moved away from the communism metaphor and more towards a two-party democratic system like what we have here in America. And more specifically, it introduced a character who is very similar in his mannerisms to a certain political candidate who was recently hired again. And oh my goodness, the way that Tom King just smears you along the side of a cliff, making you give an inch and give an inch and give an inch until you end up in a totally different place than where you started, is masterful, almost effortless. The political system that the animals set up in this series starts out very idealistic, and it works really well for a little while, and then it sort of starts to erode as new candidates just aren't as idealistic as the previous candidates. But it's not that bad until one very specific candidate comes along and twists everything around so that it sounds like he is the biggest proponent of the way things started, when really he's making everything backwards, meanwhile convincing everybody else that he shares the same ideals that the founders of that political system had. And look, it's not that I specifically try not to be political on my channel, it's just that I've never really seen the point in it, but I will say that I have never filled out an absentee voter ballot faster than I did after I read this series. Because with all of these murky clouds of he said, she said, and he did this because of this, and this led to this, and maybe it was because of this, all of this complex BS that we have to deal with in our political climate, I guess is what you call it. It can be really hard to say exactly what someone did wrong and why we don't like them and why we don't want to vote for them. But this series does a really good job of showing you the whole process in this slow motion arc. And when you finally get to the final issue, you can see how everything is wrong, and it's so hard to encapsulate how it got there. You just get this feeling of, yeah, that's what it is. That's how it feels. And maybe I'm babbling a little bit here. Maybe I'm not as articulate as I really should be about this kind of thing. But the series really brought clarity to what has become a very cloudy, hard to nail down political process that we have. The art by Peter Gross is pretty good. It does the job it's supposed to do. It's very clean and easy to understand. I don't think that it's the most impressive art on this top 10 list. I think there was more impressive art on the previous issues on this list, but the fact that this series got me to think, got me to reflect, actually inspired action in me is very significant. We need more comics that are as smart and well-spoken as Animal Pound. So that's number 6 on my top 10 list. Next up, holding its same place from last year's top 10 list, it's Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees by Patrick Horvath. This series is so good. It had me on the edge of my seat. Every single issue I was so excited to read. I was locked into the story. I was locked into these characters. The world building is amazing. It's so detailed and it's so pretty. It's surprising to me that I haven't read any other comics by Patrick Horvath because he really did an amazing job illustrating and writing this series. I mean, this is a great example of how focused on the details he is. You see how the blood coming out of that sack kind of goes in waves as she drags it across the grass? That's a very specific detail, but it makes it seem so much more real. I think it's an obvious talking point that this is a comic series about a serial killer, and it also takes place in this happy little furry animal town, so you have this great contrast between the very friendly looking characters and the very unfriendly deeds that they do. But I think that Horvath takes it a step further. He makes it really weird when you see these animals eating other animals and it's totally normal, but all their friends are other animals. It's this weird, gross dynamic that just makes the whole thing seem a little bit more unsettling. The overall plot is super solid, and my only real complaint is that I wish it had lasted longer so I could have spent more time in this town getting to know these characters. I would love to see this turn into a show because it is so binge-worthy. The characters are amazing, the dialogue is amazing, the pacing is amazing, the art is amazing, the scope of it is perfect. I love this series. So that's number 5. 5, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. Number 4 was number 2 on my list last year, and it has continued to be amazing. It's just that there are even more amazing titles coming out now, but this one is still so good. It's The Deviant by James Tynion IV and Joshua Hickson. I've made a lot of videos about this series because I love it. It has me on the edge of my seat. The art is just immaculate. It really sets this spooky atmosphere. My taste is also not so much action stories where the heroes are punching each other for who knows why this month. I much prefer human dramas where you have slow dismantling of somebody's character so you can really see what makes them tick, and this series is very good at that. I am genuinely so invested in this mystery. This is the number 1 comic that I want to read as soon as I get home when a new issue comes out. It's very tight. There is no fat on this story at all, but it still leaves tons of time for us to just sit with the gross feelings that you get from it. The aesthetic is amazing. Joshua Hickson is a master of capturing the moment. I was a little worried when the series went way past the season of Christmas last year and extended into this year, but they really spread out these issues so that they could finally conclude the series in the Christmas season again, which is a nice detail. The reason that it's number 4 instead of number 2 like last year is because, yeah, Hickson has these amazing pages every once in a while, but a lot of the pages are just kind of talking heads, which is not all that impressive except for the emotion that he shows on the characters' faces, whereas the next 3 issues have just fantastic art on every single page. And more importantly, I think the scope of this series is smaller. It's more narrow than the scope of the next 3 series. It has a lot to say. It's very introspective. It's classic James Tynion IV, and I could think about the series all day long, but multi-layered as it is just a serial killer story. Like I said, I had to work really hard to make this list, so every little thing factored in. But I love The Deviant. It's one of my favorite series. I wholeheartedly recommend reading it for yourself. It's number 4 on my top 10 list. Part of the reason that I struggled so much with deciding the order of the comics in this video was because I really wanted my number 1 comic from last year to be the number 1 comic this year. I love this series and I want it to get all the accolades it deserves, but when it really came down to it, Kaya by Wes Craig is number 3 on my top 10 list of 2024. And that is because this is one of those never-ending quest tales where you have a new thing pop up every issue and you have to go deal with this thing so that you can do this thing so that you can do this thing and eventually do this thing. And I know that Wes Craig is intending on doing like 50 issues, so we're about halfway through the entire arc, but I am starting to lose the sense that things are getting somewhere. The developments in the world of the Atrians is really interesting. The development where we have this new character, Razel, is also interesting, but I'm just not as engaged as I was in the first 6 issues, especially even the first 12 or 15 issues. Don't get me wrong, this series is still amazing. Wes Craig's art with Jason Wordie's colors is just some of the best art you will find in comics, period. The world building is still so impressive. The dialogue is so impressive. The character dynamics is so impressive. It's got that thing where it's kid-friendly, but it also has very adult ideas that it's dealing with, so it's really an all-audiences book, and it's very compelling no matter what your age is. I love it. I really want to see it through to its ending, so I would greatly encourage you to go buy the single issues, because it's only when you spend money on single issues that the publishers know that they can keep spending money producing the issues. But I did have to make the very difficult decision of pushing Kaya down to number 3 on my top 10 comics of 2024. Number 2 on my list I don't think got nearly enough love when it came out, partly because of all you sissies out there who are afraid of big words. It's Helen of Wyndhorn by Tom King and Bill Quist-Evely. Tom King's writing is so literate. He's like an actual writer, not just some guy who likes superheroes and spandex. We have like 4 narratives stacked on top of each other throughout this miniseries. We have Helen's perspective, we have her nanny's perspective, we have her nanny's interviewer's perspective, we have her nanny's interviewer's boyfriend's perspective, and another guy who bought something at a yard sale who bought it from another person and who knows, it's just so complicated, and it's all these things all at once, but it's telling the same story from a bunch of different perspectives, and we can see this long form progression of how a story evolves over like 100 years. Most of the series is spent with Helen herself in this fantasy world, which is so beautifully drawn by Bilquis Evely. This is another one of those series where there is so much thought and care and expertise being put into every single panel. It's like every page could be a pinup on your wall. You have all these colorful, well-realized characters that are very unique and have their own way of speaking and moving and thinking. The world building is amazing. You really feel like you are stepping into a whole other dimension when you read this series. The ending was very satisfying. This is one of the most fulfilling comic series I have ever read. Tom King is a frickin' genius. So that's number 2, Helen of Wyndhorn. And then number 1, I wasn't really expecting this to be my number 1 pick when I was looking at them all on the floor, but when I really broke it down into what mattered to me for what made comics great this year, the best choice was The Nice House by the Sea by James Tynion IV and Alvaro Martinez Bueno. This is right up my alley, and you can especially tell by the way that it is very similar to the comic I've been writing. But even if it wasn't the kind of narrative that I'm really into, it's just amazing art. Some of the most impressive art that I have seen, whether it's in a comic or not. And the plot development moving from The Nice House on the Lake to The Nice House by the Sea is so captivating, and the character work is like the most introspective thing James Tynion IV has ever done. I feel like if I was friends with Tynion, he would know me way better than I know myself, and just once in a while he would say something that cut me so deeply to the core of who I am as a person that I wouldn't even have known it, and it would just ruin me for weeks. He's that kind of writer where he can just see you, every single part of you, and he can articulate it in a way that is so truthful and spot on and terrifying. I'm happy that we get to see the same situation that we had in The Nice House on the Lake from a different perspective. These characters have a very different idea of how this is supposed to go. The stakes have been raised. The characters have more drama with each other. If you are on the edge of your seat for The Nice House on the Lake, you are on the edge of your seat for The Nice House by the Sea. It's just, there's so many layers that you can pull apart. This is a real thinking, feeling piece of art. This series meets me where I am, and then it pushes me to expect more out of literature, out of comics, out of myself, out of the way that I interact with people in my life. I love it. I love this series. So it's number 1 because I think that it has the most artistic merit. I think it has the most intellectual merit. I really enjoy it. I am glued to the plot here. It's overall a very impressive package. And that's why it's the number 1 comic of 2024, The Nice House by the Sea. A lot of these series are still coming out, so make sure your local comic shop knows that you want to collect them. If they've already finished coming out, let your comic shop know anyway, and there's probably a great deluxe hardcover edition that's going to come out, and it is absolutely worth putting on your shelf. If you haven't seen Every Comic Shop in Georgia Part 1 yet, go watch it. I put so much time into that, and it's awesome. Part 2 is coming soon, as well as eventually here I'll get around to doing my yearly comic book library tour. Let me know what you thought about this top 10 list in the comments. If you think I missed something, let me know. If you think I put something on the list that didn't deserve to be there, let's fight. In the meantime, read more comics, support your local comic shop, and rise and grind, don't crease those spines.